You use AI as a personal coach. You feed the models with information and you keep going back and forth to get insights. That's what the newer generation is doing. They're reimagining schooling altogether, where you no longer need to be schooled in a traditional way. Your teacher is in the pocket. You just work with the teacher to unlock the knowledge you're interested in, unlock, the areas of growth that fits you. This education system that is no longer relevant now. I mean, we wanted to mass educate people in a certain way to produce in factories. And I think traditional schooling is going to take a big hit, and that will also apply to education in medicine.
And I think that that's the most important thing, is that these things are changing people's behaviors.
I always believe that structure drives behavior. And
we're going to get deep now.
You can't replace part of the brain.
You treat them the same.
Source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the puppets.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the $90 billion company. They had help up high, a lot of things.
The state of medtech with your host, Omar and Dr.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Many of you saw that earlier this spring, I got invited as a guest to Mayo Clinic's inaugural Cardiology and Radiology Summit for Innovation. It was a really great event. I met a lot of amazing people. One of the people who I met is Dr. Mohamad Alkhouli, who's our guest today. Dr. Alkhouli is the professor of medicine and vice chair for strategic partnerships at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. He's also the deputy editor for the Journal of American College of Cardiology. And fortunately, he's also active on X. I'm getting more active on X as well. I love X because for me personally, I learned more on X than a lot of times what I learned in medical school. So if you're on X, give him a follow. He's at Adnan Alkhouli on X. That's spelled ADNANALKHOULI. And that being said, Dr. Alkhouli, it's great to have you on the show finally. Thanks for carving out time. How are you doing? How's the weather in Rochester today? Because when I went there, it was colder in California than it was in Rochester, which is crazy.
It's probably the same now. Weather is outstanding. It's great. Thank you, Omar, for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thanks for joining the summit. My only disclosure for today is, I think, to go on a show called The State of Medtech, you should not be wearing a suit. But at Mayo Clinic, when we are doing clinical duties, we typically have a dress code as a full suit. So I apologize for that. And I'm looking forward to the conversation.
We love it. No, I love it. I love getting dressed up. I feel like I should have had a blazer on at least. So, but no, not at all. Again, you're in work attire, so I appreciate it. And and so we're going to cover a lot of things today, from innovation gaps to AI, etc. But maybe the first place to start is that when I was doing a little research and reading some of the publications you had and everything, you had described this thing about an innovation gap in interventional cardiology. And I was wondering if you can talk about what is specifically causing that gap and what kind of things do we do to start closing it?
Yeah, thank you. This is such a critical topic, and it's multifaceted, but let's try to break it down in an intuitive manner. The innovation gap, what I mean by it is this difference between lifespan and health span, right? So the lifespan is essentially how long people live, and the health span is how long do they live in good health. And there's quite a bit of literature on that, and in the US, that gap is about 11 years. So that means the last 11 years of our life, we're living with chronic illness, disability, cognitive decline. We're really not enjoying those last few days. Remember, healthcare is not just about adding years to life, but adding life to years. That's really the health gap, innovation gap that I mentioned. The other gap is more becoming of an emergency now, which is how the expense of healthcare and expense of innovation. If you know that $4.5 trillion is how much the US spends on healthcare every year. That's about 17 to 18% of the GDP, twice as much as all of the, or the most, I would say, wasteful economies when it comes to healthcare, 17 to 18% of the GDP. So a lot of this is attributed to innovations, to new devices, new technologies that are expensive when they come out. So we're living longer, but not necessarily healthier. At the same time, we're doing it in such an expensive and unsustainable manner that we really have to take a hard, critical look at our innovation pathways. Maybe, you asked also about the reasons for it. And that's a whole, that topic can take a whole hour, and it will make for a fun, nice debate because people have different opinions on it. And I try to formulate, study all the trends and the literature and see what is it that we're missing. I always enjoy this, taking a more holistic view in medicine and understand what is missing. So if you would like, I can share the couple of reasons I think are the most critical reasons why the innovation gap occurs.
No, absolutely. And, maybe on that topic, like one thing that I read, you had this paper on about AI encode, or the AI encode show. I'm sorry, you did that. And one of the things you did mention is that, like, angiograms haven't really changed in about like 50 years. And
Hmm.
so I'm wondering, like, why that is, and then, how do we start fixing that? Because I think what happened in the last couple of years is we've had innovation come out. We've heard about AI, but I think going to Ray Kurzweil's law of accelerating innovations, that these innovations start building one on top of each other. And now you're having this not linear, but algorithmic spike in innovation. The last like year or two, life has changed dramatically for
Hmm.
all of us. So
Absolutely.
who knows what's going to look like even 5 years from now?
Exactly. I mean, just look about how we were practicing TAVR when I was a fellow about 10 years ago and how it is now. It used to be that everybody wants to jump on a case, and the rooms are just can't sustain how many people. Now I can barely get a fellow to join me for the case. Um, so if you don't mind, I would like to maybe just go over the reasons first, because I think AI has a big role in solving this innovation gap. But maybe if we discuss the reasons, the
Please.
integration of AI becomes a little bit more organic.
Totally.
I think, in my opinion, there are three major reasons why we have this innovation gap. And some of it has to do with the academic method, and some of it has to do with our incentives and drivers of innovation. So
Hmm.
the first reason is the personalization paradox, as I call it. So, in healthcare still treats us like an average. We treat populations, but people don't live as populations. They live as individuals, right? It's an incredibly interesting topic because, ironically, at least in democracies in Western countries, there are a lot of emphasis on individualistic approaches to things, but yet in healthcare, we really treat people as average. Everything we talk about means and population health and all of that, and we rarely focus on what it does it mean for the individual patient. Our risk scores that we commonly use in our clinics, they will just say if you take 1,000 patients and you apply treatment A versus B, a couple hundreds may feel better, some may feel worse, a lot won't feel any difference. So that's all good from a population standpoint. But if you, Omar, come to my clinic and I tell you I recommend this treatment, you are thinking that I'm recommending this treatment for you individually as a potentially helpful treatment, right? While I'm really just regurgitating an academic method that treats populations, not individuals. So I think that's a very important mistake that we have, unfortunately, adapted in our ways in our scientific ways. The other problem is, I would say, maybe call it fragmentation of how we look at the body and at cardiovascular system. We think about the heart, for example. We In cardiology, we view the heart like a machine that has parts. There's rhythm, there's valves, pressure, arteries, veins, this and that, right? But the patient doesn't care about all of this. The patient feels all of this as one thing. It may manifest as breathlessness, chest pain, heartbreak, you call it whatever you want to call it. But to the patient, it's not a fragmented issue, it's a unified problem. We decided to take a simplistic way because it's easier to tackle a valve as a valve, right? Not to tackle the whole, this is so complex. But if you think in a system dynamic term, the system dynamics don't care about your approaches to individual things. Every treatment has effects. Like, we decide that there is a main effect and side effects, but it's not the case. They're all effects. They're working. There's loops, feedback loops, balancing loops. This is how the body works, and this is what the patients will eventually feel. And I think this is the deep problem with the scientific method again, that we decide to take bits and pieces and not look at the global thing. A tangible example, you're familiar with transcatheter aortic valve replacement, right? We've this major innovation that was approved in the US 2011. Hundreds of thousands of people have been treated successfully with it. And it's one of the most celebrated innovation in cardiology in the last 20 years. But the problem is we start by focusing on the valve alone, and then we find out that only maybe half of the patients are alive and well at 1 year. This is US data from the TVT registry. And then we started looking, oh, why do a lot of people don't feel better? Or maybe we should come up with something called cardiac damage assessment. We should assess what is happening to the ventricle, to the atrium, to the arteries. Maybe there's another term called coupling, decoupling between the heart and the arteries, heart and other organs. And then suddenly we decide that, oh, we really focus on one thing while this is a holistic problem and we should have thought about it as a whole, right? Like what Aristotle would say, the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. So that's the second problem. It's the fragmentation, piecemeal approach to a global cardiovascular system that has not served us very well. And I would say maybe the last example or the last reason is the lack of grounding our innovation in pathophysiology. Me and you are very excited about innovation. We want new devices. We want a lot of things to come to the market, come to the bedside, help the patients. But in my opinion, we really can't fix well what we don't understand well. We have to fully understand the problem. And a very, very tangible example here is all of the innovation that you see in the tricuspid valve space now. So for many, many years, we were told that it doesn't matter if you have tricuspid regurgitation. That's why this valve became the forgotten valve. And then suddenly now, oh no, the valve is very important and we should really take care of it. And that was 100% driven by innovations, transcatheter innovations that taught us that we could replace the valve. But we don't understand how tricuspid regurgitation happens. We don't understand its natural history. We don't know when we should fix it. We don't know how much of it we should fix. But we have technologies and we want to fit it into a problem that we don't understand. And we're started to see that maybe the outcomes are not as great as we had hoped for. That's the lack of, grounding in pathophysiology. So again, the reasons for this innovation gap, in my opinion, are population-based models over individual realities, fragmented approach to a holistic cardiovascular system, and lastly, the lack of grounding in deep pathophysiological understanding of the problem.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think you have a very good point about grounding these innovations in pathophysiology. I think, in the past, everybody would agree with that. I think the problem, though, is that it requires so much knowledge and education and data that it's a daunting task. I think that's one thing that AI can help with right now because, I think traditional medicine teaches us that, like, if you have a diseased organ, then if you can't treat it, you should just get it, you should remove it from the body. But then we don't know the ripple effects of doing those kind of things,
Yeah.
And I think, again, I don't know the research on it, but something that kind of comes to mind immediately for me is like doing appendectomies, right? So you have an appendix, you just, it doesn't really serve that much of a function to our knowledge, and we remove it. But we don't know what the ripple effects of that is. And so is it better that we remove that diseased organ, or is there other ways that we treat it? Something that we're seeing in the prostate world is rather than having surgical interventions to remove a prostate, we have different like ultrasound guided focal therapies that treat the diseased organ, but then it gets absorbed into the body. So there's no cutting, no incisions, So I think these kind of questions are really important about how do we move, we move from traditional medicine to modern medicine to, let's say, the next phase of medicine of like questioning how we do these things. And I think your point on the valves is really important. What do you think? What do you think the next step should be like on these sort of procedures, at least in the cardiology world?
You bring up a very interesting analogy because we have a very similar thing in the heart called the left atrial appendage. We usually use the appendix as the metaphor or as the analogy. and we say, well, it's there, we don't know what it does, but we know that clots can form in it and we should close it or think about closing it. So now research is showing that the appendage actually has a lot of neat functions, and had we understand those from the beginning, maybe we would have approached it differently. But anyhow, let me just build on what you said about AI, because you asked me about AI earlier, and we described an innovation gap. We maybe speculated some reasons for this innovation gap. Can AI solve the problem? Is it Dr. Google that's gonna change all of this? Because speaking of traditional medicine, somebody may come and say, "You guys just have to be doctors. You come up with all these buzzwords, precision medicine, cutting, edge innovation. All what you have to do is to go back to the drawing board and just reflect and understand things deeply, right?" So the other school would say, "No, AI will do it all." So which school do you belong to, right? So let me tell you my evolution, if you'd like,
I'd
about
love to
how.
hear evolution, but I want to hear what I want a foreshadowing. I got to ask you the question, and I'll answer it myself. Where do you fall in that in between those two camps?
Yeah, I was more of the traditional mindset until a couple years ago. I
Okay.
thought AI was overhyped. I thought that what we're lacking is not really more technology. What we're lacking is more thoughtful deliberation and understanding pathophysiology and identifying real unmet needs. I was disappointed that a lot of technologies are erupting looking for problems to solve rather than the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
Until I went to San Francisco and I took some rides in the Waymo, driverless cars, because I said to myself, well, I would like to understand why is this driverless car claimed to have less accidents than human drivers. And then I looked at the study that Google published, and it's legit. There is a lot of good data to show that driverless cars could have less accidents than humans. So how do you explain that? Is the machine better than human or not? Right? So that took a more philosophical turn. And what I concluded, really, like reflecting on this experience and looking at AI in medicine, that human are always, every day, and maybe twice on the weekend, will be better decision makers than any machine. But this is a qualified statement. If they're given equal capabilities. If they're given equal capabilities, they will always be smarter and better decision makers. However, machines could potentially win when they come equipped with more eyes, more memory, like the Waymo car, right? And a bigger brain. You can't have 100 eyes as a driver. You barely have two, and sometimes you're only using one of the two, right? And even if you're paying attention and getting data from all directions, you can't comprehend all of the data at the same time. You forget, you may be not reacting as fast, and you have conflicting things coming, right? So that's the analogy I would like to maybe drive home when it comes to the use of AI in medicine. Humans are better decision makers if they have equal capabilities, but AI can give you more eyes and a bigger brain. More eyes to see a lot more data, and a bigger brain to analyze and react in microseconds and make better decisions. That's how I
I
moved from being super skeptical to, no, we should embrace. I still think AI is overhyped, but not all the way. I think it's a little bit overhyped, but there is a ton of value that we could drive from AI.
I agree, and for me at least, um, I think that these LLMs that we're dealing with now, and now the next thing is working more toward agenic AI. Is There's a lot of nuance that AI currently, in its current form, at least with generative AI, it misses, and that's where human beings help a lot. And I think that the future is sort of a cohesion, kind of like Ray Kurzweil talks about the singularity. This is where there's a blend of the two things. So, like for myself, just as an example, in my business, I have a marketing agency. We do, part of what we do is ads and copywriting. Is I have an AI that can develop a lot of copy, but there's certain nuance that it misses that I have to help fill in. And so there's this, I think that the skill set now is not necessarily, I think 2 years ago, 3 years ago, prompt engineering, developing the right prompts was the art form. I think now is the ability to have a conversation with the AI and refine things back and forth versus just like giving it a prompt, getting something back, and then being done with it.
And also, Omar, using it for what's missing, right? If you want to use it to do the same exact thing that you're doing and you're very proficient and efficient and great at, not a lot of added value. You asked me about AI in code. What was that project? We walk in to do a cardiac cath, a coronary angiogram, right? This is a familiar procedure. We put catheters in the arteries and we inject contrast in the coronary arteries and we take X-ray pictures, right? And what I realized is I've shown some angiograms to my friends and I asked them, can you tell me what's wrong with the angio? And they all identified the coronary lesions, okay? But then I showed it to them again and I said, can you tell me what's wrong? It's like, we told you what's wrong. What are you talking about? It's like, do you see anything else? And in every single one of those angio, there was another problem. One patient had potassium tablets. They were stagnant in the stomach. They were shown in behind, but because we're focused on one area, we're not seeing it. We think the patient has effectively been loaded with medications while they were not. In another image, the heart arteries were exhibiting limited motion in certain part of the heart, but we're not really paying attention to that potentially, very important information. Reduction in ejection fraction. And in another one, there's a lot of calcium on the valve that we really don't pay attention to. So what I'm saying here is there's an immense amount of data that is already around us that we don't use, right?
Right.
So
I was gonna say, it sounds like from this, you're essentially extracting new insights from old imaging. Like it was always there, we just didn't know.
Exactly. And then we're actually applying it in the lab now on a dashboard where the images are going live into the cloud where the algorithms are run and coming back to the cath lab and spitting real-time input that, oh, this patient may have low ejection fraction. This patient may have right ventricular dysfunction. This patient may have this and that with a fairly high, predictive ability. And then that would make these are your additional eyes, right? These are the additional capabilities in the case to make better decision as the main driver. You're still in the driver's seat, you're still making the decisions, but you're equipped with more real-time important data. And then we're expanding it further now to include data from ECG, from the pulse oximetry, from essentially any bio data that is being emitted during the procedure that we're not paying attention to.
I'm wondering also, like, using advent AI, like in this case where you mentioned that you're using old images, but you're extracting new data, like things that were always there, but you just had no idea of. Do you feel like that's going to? Let me restate this question. I believe that when you start developing a new way to generate new data at a higher level consistently, that will change medical practice.
Absolutely. Because we start retrospectively. We start, they I don't know who said this quote, but wisdom starts as hindsight, and then it becomes mid-sight, and then it becomes foresight, right? So you always start retrospectively looking at what you missed, and then you think about it in the moment, and then you derive a lot of prospective insights. So one major area of potential innovation that I think AI will eventually do is multimodal algorithms. So instead of feeding one entity or one kind of data to the algorithm, so currently sometimes we feed an ECG or an angiogram or an echo picture to the algorithm and ask the algorithm, oh, what do you think of XYZ? I think the future will be multimodal, will be structured, unstructured, imaging, waveform, genomics, all of the stuff that the patient has. And these data are already present and available in silos. And it is very hard for a human to get a hold of all of that without having 100 hands 200 eyes and a massive brain, right? And that's where AI will bring new insights. For example, for aortic stenosis, we currently use very crude dichotomous threshold to say this is severe valve disease, not severe valve disease. I think that will be way outdated in the future, where you walk into the clinic, you have a ton of digital biomarkers that are being collected, voice, eye movement, body motion, pulse oximetry, all of that, and then you add to it the echo data, the ECG data, everything that you're doing, and then the machine or the AI algorithm will tell you, based on comparison with outcomes from before, this patient has worse valve disease, maybe stage A, B, C, based on an AI, classification rather than our fairly crude way of dichotomizing and classifying disease now. I think that's a very exciting area for the future.
Why do you feel like that's such an exciting area?
Because this is the first time where we're being equipped with 100 eyes and a massive brain. Everything in the past has been, we research one thing, we come up with some insight, and then other people are researching other things, and we don't connect the dots. That's why I think the Waymo really analogy is pretty cool. At least for me, it was very informative, because what is Waymo compared to a human driver? Just more eyes and a bigger brain, instant analysis, and lots of data. So that's what we will bring. But instead of bringing one kind of data, we'll bring all of the available data, and putting it in a more cohesive way to come up with new insights.
If AI can detect signs beyond coronaries, like, let's say, subtleties in ejection fraction or shock, or maybe some incidental findings, do you believe that could fundamentally raise the safety floor for when invasive procedures are done?
It's already doing that. I mean, that's already here. We already have a lot of advanced risk modeling based on AI. I wouldn't say we have unleashed the full capabilities of AI on that. When we do, then things will be safer. We may or may not like all of what it brings, though. We may find that we're doing unnecessary procedures. We may find that some of the procedures are good and successful, but they're futile because the patients are already, fill of the curve, and they're not going to feel better. But regardless, it will be good for everyone. It will be good for humanity to become more precise based on multimodal insights.
Got it. Like currently, like at the Mayo Clinic, are these models, are they something that are internally developed? Do you work with like industry for this? This is something that like a lot of people don't know how that essentially works.
All of the above. Most of the models we have are internally homegrown models. Our departments have been really, I would say, visionary in that sense that to build models, what do you need? You need data, computational capabilities, and then smart engineers, right? So our departments are clinical departments, and they decided to set aside dollars specifically to invest in bringing data scientists, to invest in, buying computational capabilities, and because Mayo has an immense amount of data, right? And then we have, in cardiology alone, we have 12 AI data scientists working full time to develop algorithms. So while we're open to developing algorithms with other entities, but just like we have so much data and enough capabilities now, I do think in the future we'll probably tap into a wider talent and scale up that innovation. There is something called the Mayo Clinic Platform. I don't know if you're familiar with it, where all of the useful data at Mayo historically has been labeled, packaged, and made available for scientists and industry to tap into, to run analyses and drive new insights, drug discovery, device development, you name it. So there is a whole way to interface with our data for anybody who's interested through the Mayo Clinic platform.
And for those, for any entrepreneurs or founders listening, you can learn more if you go to mayoclinicplatform.org. Something I want you to talk about is in the AI Encode research that we did, we saw that he had talked about the use of something called salience mapping. Can you talk a little bit about what salience mapping is? Why is that
Yeah,
important in terms of
yeah.
building
I
clinical
think
trust?
the bigger maybe term to be used here is something called explainable AI. One of
Hmm.
the unease with AI is it's a black box. So how can I trust, if I ask Omar a question about marketing, he's spent his life doing this, he knows everything inside out, right? Uh, I will put my trust in you and I will take your insight if I have a marketing job that I want to develop, right? Same thing with patients and doctors. They trust the doctor because they have spent their time learning and coming up with useful knowledge to give back to the patient. It's not the case with AI. It's viewed as a black box. It's viewed as a box that you fed data into and it told you what to do. It's the same as ChatGPT. When ChatGPT gives you information, you take it, but you verify. You trust but verify. You just don't trust blindly, right? Um, so I think saliency map is one technique that we can explain our findings in AI encode by an intuitive manner. So the whole premise of that AI encode is that the heart arteries overlay the heart, and then their displacement during squeezing and motion of the heart, the displacement of this artery would mean something, would mean reduction in ejection fraction or shock or whatever. And that's to be able to prove that we did saliency mapping to show that that's the case indeed. Most of the informative data that fed the model came from just around the arteries. So explainable AI is the more broad topic, and it's something that the journals are asking for now. If you submit a paper, say my AI algorithm can tell you if my mother-in-law is mad at me. Like, well, explain how that was derived, right? So we no longer just take things as blind believers. We now want some proof, and that's what explainable AI does.
You know what I love about that is that as physicians, everyone's now getting an opportunity to treat AI exactly how they were treated as residents and fellows.
Exactly, exactly. That's a cool one.
Right now, uh, you know, practice of medicine, no doubt, is going to change a lot. One thing that we're seeing on the AI front in terms of education is that, like I have young children, but they're not like old enough to go to school yet. But we're seeing like in schools where students are essentially using AI to listen and take notes and do homework, and then the teachers are using AI to grade papers and do lesson plans. And I'm wondering, like, what are the potential? I mean, we've talked a lot about the positive effects, but like, what are the potential concerns that you might have that AI could
Hmm.
impact when it comes to like medical training?
That's a deep question. You know, uh, if you look at how different generations, I mean, you mentioned the teacher and the student, right? It's the same thing in medicine, the same thing in industry too. Older generations are using AI as as an aid, just to maybe improve workflows, summarize things, and all of that. I know we talked about this. I don't know if you qualify as Gen Z or whatever generation you
I'm
qualify
I'm like an
as.
older millennial.
Okay, but you use AI as a personal coach, right? From what we've talked about, you feed AI, you feed the models with information, and you keep going back and forth to get insights. That's what the newer generation is doing. Actually, there were a couple of startups that I looked at recently. They're reimagining schooling altogether, where you no longer need to be schooled in a traditional way. Your teacher is in the pocket. You just work with the teacher to unlock the knowledge you're interested in, unlock the areas of growth you that fits you. And I think that's so intriguing, and it could disrupt this education system was a product of the industrial time that is
Right.
no longer relevant now. I mean, we wanted to mass educate people in a certain way to produce in factories, and we still do that now, even though time has changed. And I think traditional schooling is going to take a big hit, and that will also apply to education in medicine. It's no longer like the doctor is telling the resident or the fellow, oh, this is how you do this. It's like, no, I don't think so. um, my son took a picture. My daughter had just a small hair lesion the other day. he took a picture. He's 14 years old and made a diagnosis based on just a picture of the hair lesion, using language models and AI. And when I came, I said, well, I'm not sure because this and this, and he started arguing with me, and we took her to the doctor, and we did the culture and all of that, and the diagnosis was correct. So now you're having this 14-year-old kid who knows nothing about medicine, so it's a double-edged sword. It can be really, really helpful. It can democratize healthcare. It can treat a lot of people who don't have access, but at the same time, it can be a dangerous tool. And if you talk about education, who is putting the information in the models? I mean, at the end of the day, those models are not coming from a vacuum, right? They're being trained with certain data. And if you ask, different LLMs, different questions, I don't want to dive into politics, but if you ask political questions to different LLMs run by different countries, you get different answers, right?
Yes.
So it will be the same for educational theories. It'll be the same for social, constructs. It'll be the same for anything. I think it's a fascinating area. I don't know what will happen. I'm optimistic, but I can see how this could really, really go wrong.
Yeah. Well, on the topic, to kind of bring it back to medicine, like in terms of these AI models, something that I think is interesting, like one of the issues with medicine up to this date is the ability to prevent certain pathologies, illnesses, etc. You have to be better and better about predicting them, and the only way you can predict them is getting more data earlier and sooner. And the problem, though, is that only happens if the patient comes in, like for a blood draw, for a checkup, all these kind of things. But now there are all these wearables and different devices that enable the patients to self-monitor and get better. You're a cardiologist. You've known about heart rate variability since you were trained. But in the last couple of years, now, like, the average person knows what heart rate variability is and why that's important. And I'm currently wearing a Whoop device. Shout out, I just had Dr. David Albert on the show. So the best personal ECG out there is, the one that AliveCore has. But this, for like a basic function for somebody without a pathology or irregular heartbeat, like now my Whoop device has ECG in it that I'm able to check it daily if I want. And so I'm wondering, like, do you feel like this is going to be, it's definitely going to change the practice of medicine. It's going to be difficult, but I think that this will also, as we talked about before with the imaging, that these insights are going to unlock things that have always been there that we weren't aware of, and that will have a massive impact on clinical training and clinical practice.
I think maybe I'll take this a little bit further, Omar. Maybe in
Take
a challenging manner. I think this is forcing us to redefine what health is. What health means to you is different than what health means to the doctors. It's different than what health means to institutions, insurance companies, hospitals, societies, right? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, you are the human, you are the patient or the healthy individual, right? And I think, for a very long time, it's a very simple question. What is health, right? To you, it's very different. You're wearing these wearables, you're getting all this insight. You may have certain views of what does it mean to be healthy. While it may not come as a surprise to you, there is no unified definition of health. Indeed, the World Health Organization tried to come up with the unified definition. Do you know how old that definition is now?
How old is it?
It's 77 years old. And that definition, I think it was something like a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being. It's not just the absence of disease. 1948 definition.
I'm pulling it up. It's so the definition is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity.
Here we go. Right. So 1948. Why wasn't that, adapted as much? Because it's idealistic, static, hard to, comprehend. And then we went in the Medtech innovation, biomed innovation, sprint, and we invented so many things, and are now we focused on absence of disease or dysfunction, right? What you were telling me earlier is like the best way to treat a disease or to be healthy is to identify the disease from the very beginning. We still have that mindset of a disease or dysfunction, right? And then it's specifically organ based in most innovations. We ignore mental, emotional, social, all the other dimensions that are maybe for some patients more important, right? I think there was somebody, Huber et al., in the early 2010s, came up with this concept of dynamic health, that it's not really being ill or being healthy. It's the ability to adapt and self-manage to face all of the challenges, whether they're social, physical, emotional, medical, all of that. So it's more like as a functional resilience concept than the perfect well-being. So here we went from the WHO definition that was very idealistic, that everything has to be good, then to the biotech, medtech, concept, which is disease-based, organ-based, to something in the middle, like, we may never be very healthy. We're all going to die at some point. Everybody has an up and down, and that's just the nature of life. You can't change that. Nobody now is around is over 100, 400 years old, and in 100 years, none of us will be around. So that's just reality. But health, then, in that dynamic definition, is how we incorporate all of those challenges and come up with a way that we feel healthy, we feel able to take control of our environment, and as a collective thing, not just as a system or an organ. So I don't know if this was too much philosophy, Omar, but I think it's an
There's
important
never
question.
too much philosophy for this show. This is that I receive the compliment from time to time that people feel that this is a Joe Rogan show of medtech, but for these reasons, like we want to get deep into these kind of topics. I think you're right. I think the good thing about the advent of all this technology and education is that just like when you receive data, like if it's good data, it'll change your behavior, right? So I think just like how wearables are changing people's behavior around health, I think the advent of these new technologies and information is going to change the way people define things. And I think we see that especially in how people view work these days,
Yep.
and what's like necessarily, like, do you necessarily need to drive into the office every single day? For some things, I would say yes. For other things, probably not, And I think that, that's the most important thing, is that these things are changing people's behaviors.
Absolutely. And I think, what I always believe that structure drives behavior, and the structure that we have now.
Oh, we're gonna
and the
get deep
behavior.
now, because we
Yeah.
talked about the night that we were having dinner. Yeah,
Yeah.
tell us, unpack that about what you mean by that the structure drives behavior.
So let's take maybe just a global view of the country. How many times when we sit, and people who are interested in history, they always talk about what the institutions that we see now, let's say in the United States, were a product of the beliefs, the philosophies, the vision of the founding fathers, right? So first came the philosophy, the beliefs, the vision, then came the institution, then came the behavior, right? Because if the river is constructed in a certain way, water will go in a certain way. Some water may leak aside, but everything will go in a predictable direction, right? So I think the same thing applies here. A lot of our innovations circle around behaviors. Some go back to the system level, but very few go back to the philosophical level, right? That's why I mentioned, like, what is health? If you want to invent things that improve health, shouldn't we, as baseline, have a unified definition of what health is, or agree on at least some broad definition of health? So that's what I meant by, the system drives the behavior. Another example would be this concept of democratization of innovation. where people are in the US. There is an economic drive to innovate. There is strong IP protection. There are opportunities. There's way to fund your innovations, right? So that's what drives all people to go crazy and come up with new ideas, and that's why a lot of innovations come from here. But for many years in healthcare, at least, because health is so important, we've said just innovate at any cost, and the health system is paying for it. And as we talked earlier, the cost is ballooning and it's no longer sustainable, right? But at the same time, most of the innovation is coming from what slice of the pie? What percentage of physician you think in the one you might be biased because you meet a lot of people who interact with the innovation, at least ecosystem. But maybe I would estimate that less than 5% of healthcare workers, physicians, allied, staff, others who are in healthcare, do anything related to innovation. If you take that statistics and compare it to what I believe is how widespread creativity is, and how widespread knowledge of problems is, those physicians have their finger on the pulse. They see the patients, they know what's wrong, they have very good way of identifying the pain points. But they're not given the mic, right? They're in their silos, they do their practice, and just very few of them who are having some midlife crisis or they have biomedical engineering background, they go into innovation. So the structure of the system that we have built for innovation isolated the vast majority of people who have a very good grasp of the unmet need, who are maybe as creative as others and maybe more creative than others, right? But they haven't been given the access to innovation. So that's a concept that I would like to maybe work on actually in the next few years, is how do we democratize innovation so it's no longer a shark tank for those few innovative people who got to apply and got on the show, but how you actually reach to the practitioners, to the trainees, to the nurses who are seeing problems, and get really deep and get on the ground and understand the pain points. And maybe if they want to be part of the journey, they can. If they don't want to be part of the journey, at least they will give us so much insight that innovation will no longer be imprecise. Because this whole thing about the funnel of ideas, you have to have 1,000 ideas for one to work. And I don't agree with that. I think we have to have 1,000 ideas because we don't get granular. We don't get all the 360 insights. We don't involve a lot of people who know what the problem is. And that's why we have to, shoot in the dark and put a lot of ideas into the funnel to get one that might work.
No, I agree. And, if I can just extrapolate a little bit more about, because just kind of hearing what you're saying and thinking about this, that 100% that the system or the structure essentially drives behavior. If we apply that and think about that about healthcare, and bear with me here, like this is how I'm thinking about AI, is that, the way that the healthcare system is designed, not just the hospitals, with the payers and everything, from, let's say, incentives, the workflows, the data infrastructure, all these different things, does shape how physicians are going to behave, how innovation is adopted or ignored, and how patient care is delivered. So even something as amazing as, let's say, AI, it won't create the impact it could if the system itself doesn't change and adapt, right?
Absolutely.
And then when I think about like the system or structure of healthcare, there are like a couple, maybe 2 or 3 things, and I might be missing something. So please help me fill in the gaps here. I think about the fee for service model, right? Where, it's essentially rewarding a lot of procedures, not prevention. I think about the EHR systems, which was really designed for medical billing, more than anything. And, a lot of physicians are frustrated with that. And that a lot of silos that happen within these hospitals and healthcare systems, and then more so like on the payer side, when innovation is being developed, there's not a lot of transparency with the payers. So like when you develop a product or anything, there's not, there's not essentially and Dr. Josh Mackauer from Stanford Biodesign came on the show and we spent a whole hour talking about this, that there's no transparency where it's like, hey, if this project gets funded and we develop this product and everything, there's an actual path for this to get reimbursed and get paid, because that's like the one thing
Killer.
they'll decide whether it's going to get adopted. You can have an amazing product with great clinical application and benefit, but if it doesn't have a reimbursement or economic model tied to it, it's not going to get adopted at all.
Yeah, stakeholder mapping is even more critical with AI, because one of the challenges that we talk about a lot.
What kind of mapping? I missed that.
A stakeholder mapping.
Stakeholder mapping. Yes.
So
yes.
it's important in general, but in AI is so fundamental because, okay, let's say, maybe I'll give you a practical example from what we have here at Mayo. We have a very smart group of electrophysiologists, and if you end up doing the show with Dr. Noseworthy, he can tell you more. He was leading that work, where take a simple ECG that you could derive a couple data points usually, and you could unlock a lot of insights from the ECG. Some of that is related to detecting, weak heart muscle or low ejection fraction. Some of it can be related to detecting aortic stenosis. Let's just take aortic stenosis. There are a lot more algorithms that have been developed. But I'm telling you that you can have a simple ECG, and I can predict if you have aortic valve stenosis or not, which in the past would have required a full echocardiogram. Now I can predict that from the ECG. Still have to do the echo to verify, but you can scan patients at large, at scale, and then detect disease early. Mayo also ran a trial in our practices to randomizing patients to usual care versus AI-based care, where we're able to detect, and we've shown in that study that we're able to detect more aortic stenosis. And this is all great. It led to great publications in the top tier journals. However, payers then ask, do I really want to get thousands of patients to get AI-based ECG and pay for all of that, and then pay for all of the echoes and the downstream testing that would result from that screening, and then also do the procedures then to fix their valves? Does that improve their longevity? Does that improve their outcomes? Does that improve their health? We don't even know what health is. So there is quite a bit of pushback from the whole system, and that's what slowing a lot of the AI algorithms. There is a huge number of AI algorithms being developed every day, but at the end of the day, because healthcare is complicated, it has who's your customer in healthcare? Is it the patient? Is it the doctor? Is it the healthcare system? Is it the insurance company? Who's going to pay for the service, right? So that's the thing. I think there has to be a more integration of bringing that end thing to the very, very beginning. So maybe insurance companies should be an integral part of designing AI innovation to, because that's the reality. You may not like it, but it's a reality that at the end of the day, if the innovation stays in the lab or as an academic paper and not touch the patient, it's not a useful innovation.
Yeah, and something kind of bring it back full circle. So, I learned a lot about the history of Mayo Clinic, and more importantly, the Franciscan sisters, the nuns. So, like, one of the quotes that I really like came from Sister Generose Gervais, which was "No money, no mission," which I love it. You got leave to a nun to come up with something practical like that. Do you feel like part of here in the U.S., I'm very pro capitalism, but in some cases, the way that the world works now, I see other countries like China as an example, and others, where they decide that the government's going to subsidize and fund critical industries and innovations. And again, there's a part of me where it could be a slippery slope, but there's another side of me where I'm like, I feel like the government should get a little bit more involved in funding innovation and things that are going to be critical to the country. And I think healthcare innovation is one of those things. How do you feel about that?
It's interesting. There is now, with the current environment, there's actually a counter argument. Europeans are saying that you guys are wasteful you have a lot of grants, you fund a lot of things, and many of it doesn't lead anywhere, right? So there is an argument that there's actually overfunding of things. I don't think there's ever an overfunding,
I
but
agree. And
I
and
think,
that's innovation though, right? Is that you got to fund,
yeah,
like it's just like a VC. You're going to fund a lot of things, and a lot of them is going to fail. I don't know.
maybe
Me
take
personally,
maybe take another.
Europe has loves to criticize the U.S.
Of course,
They can
maybe
find
maybe
something to
maybe
say.
maybe we'll take it another twist that is
Huh.
also slightly tangential to what we talked about, uh, democratization of healthcare or innovation. And when we talk about producing a product or coming up with an invention, we think reimbursement in the US, right? And then secondary markets, sometimes Europe, sometimes Canada, Japan, right? But all of those countries combined constitutes less than 20% of the world population, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Now we're realizing that this innovate at any cost is not working out, and we're going to run out of money, and the system is going to collapse. So we have to come up with what Stanford calls the Stanford Bio Design Program. They call it value-based innovation, right? So it has to be innovations have to compete, and the highest value ones will eventually survive. Well, what happens in the other 80% of the population that don't have that many resources, they're actually forced to do value-based innovation. They don't have an option. And those who try to mimic what is happening in our system here, they're failing because their cost is ballooning and they don't even have the resources to pay for it. So maybe one way, instead of the government getting involved deeply in the design of innovation, is actually to have some more humility in approaching innovation at a global scale, and learn both ways. Learn from those emerging economies or lower resource areas. How do they do things? I mean, how do they, especially the ones that have good healthcare or good outcomes, how do they do it at that level, and how can we learn from them? I think we should no longer just say, well, we're innovators, we have money, we have resources, take our device, this is the best, and just do it. Maybe it should be a two-way street. Maybe we should learn from them and also consider the needs of the total world in our innovation, not just a slice of the world. I think that will be good for everyone, because I think healthcare cost could become less. A lot of people, as I said, creativity is everywhere. Access is limited, right? But maybe we should just have a more open arm and an open mind to innovation on a global level.
I love it, and I agree. I'm gonna dig a little deeper on that. So like, I'm a big believer in doing things in person. I think something, just like, look, there's a reason why I left my son and my pregnant wife and went all the way out to Rochester, because there's something very special that happens when you get together in person, right? There's a certain energy, there's something, metaphysical that happens, right? So if you were to organize some kind of like weekend summit, like, and invite some people, like, it doesn't have to be specific name, but like, who would you bring to that? Just kind of like a think tank or a brainstorm. Like, what would that look like?
Yeah. Thank you for putting another plug for the summit. We were actually just discussing today the 2.0 version of the summit, which
And by
will
the way,
be.
just so the audience knows, like, this is obviously, like, one is like, I have no like formal partnership, nothing with the Mayo Clinic, other than that they follow the show and they reached out, and shout out to Shai, by the way, who invited me as a guest. And so I went on my own accord, paid for my way out there and everything, and I really loved it. And there's a part of me that I was even thinking, sorry to like Stanford and Harvard and anybody else, like, maybe you do these things, I'm just not aware. But I was thinking, I was like, I feel like every hospital system, like the major ones, should be doing things like this, where it's like bringing people together. And just so people know, for that summit, it wasn't just like 70 or 80 Mayo Clinic physicians, which that by itself was amazing, but there was a lot of people from industry, a lot of people from just all kinds of different sectors, all coming together for one day intensive event of lectures, discussions, meetings. It was amazing. I was a
Yeah,
big fan of it.
that we were asking for, people for feedback and say, please give us the negative feedback, not just the positive. And the only negative feedback we got, it had to be longer. So that was amazing, right?
I
And we
agree,
had
and I'll add one more if I can influence this. I think we talked about this. Somebody told you guys that industry people love when you do things during the week. My thing is, like, if anybody's going to go out to Rochester, like, do it at the end of the week so that more of the physicians at Mayo can attend and people will
yes.
show up for it. You know,
Yeah, 100%. That is part of the plan for next year, and maybe just to tie it all together, the summit first version, we brought strategic companies, a lot of selected handpicked startups, Mayo physicians, investors, VC firms, and a lot of innovators from outside of Mayo, under one roof to tackle really deep topics. Uh, I think version 2 will probably incorporate some of those challenges that we discussed today, right? Going global, diving deeper into pathophysiology. So have more physicians, bring more people to the table to really come up with more effective solutions. But we're very excited. We're in the planning phase now.
well, if while I have you in a captive audience, I'm going to add one more idea, but I think it would be also very interesting for Mayo to organize this will be tough, but I think it'll be worth it. I don't know how. Well, hey, we'll do the Sam Altman thing, which is like, we'll just ask the model and it'll give us ideas. But I think like a general AI summit so that different specialties can essentially share and learn from each other. And I think that, like, I don't know, this is the thing that I'm excited about with AI and all this data, is that now we're going to get to a much, like, unless I bring the results and connect them, like, my primary care isn't like connecting with my cardiologist unless like there's some big problem, right? And I think there's this interesting approach where there's like, do you think in the future there's a possibility where there will be some specialties, but like for the most part, every clinician is going to be trained as a generalist to know everything and connect all these systems? Because with AI, you can technically do that, right?
Yeah, that's another maybe unintended consequence, right? And we'll see if it's better, but definitely happening. I don't see any way around it. I think more and more people will do it. And I just wanted to say that Mayo AI conference already happens, and it is
Oh,
it
it
is
does.
it is called the Mayo AI Summit, and it is July 7th and 8th here in Rochester. There is a virtual option if you have tight travel plan, but if you type in 2025 Mayo Clinic AI Summit, you will find it there, and you're welcome to join virtually if it's too late to attend in person.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, and I'm seeing it right now. And actually, for those who are interested, you can go to the website. It's ai-summit.com. I don't know what you guys paid for that domain name, but like, good job, Mayo Clinic,
It's good.
on
It's good.
for getting
It's
that
good.
domain. That's
Yeah,
impressive.
it's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we kind of like wrap things up, and again, I appreciate you like taking time out of your practice to come on the show. Definitely, I think you're going to be a repeat guest. I know the audience is going to love this. But sort of your last sort of thoughts on, let's say, the state of cardiology as it relates to like AI and like what's next, and what can people do, I guess, especially clinicians who are listening now, to sort of get more involved and take action.
Yeah, I'm biased. I think the heart, everything starts and ends with the heart. It's a massive generator of data in the body. AI is well poised to, unlock the capabilities of that data. So maybe if you're skeptical about AI, listen to that segment when we talked about the Waymo car and how I converted from a skeptic to more of an embracing physician. And don't be afraid. AI will not replace you as a human, but doctors who use AI will replace doctors who don't use AI. So embrace it, get on board, and bring your smart, clever insights to guide the journey.
I love that. Couldn't agree more. And just to add to it, I think if you're a clinician listening or an innovator, I think the best place to start is go online, go to Gemini, go to Notebook LM, go to ChatGPT, and just try using it for anything, whether it's like a movie recommendation, books, or something. But try and have a conversation with it. Something I think is very interesting is I have we're going to end with this last question, which is, what is our AI stack? So I'll go first. My AI stack in my phone is ChatGPT, Gemini, Notebook LM, and Grok. Those are my like go-to ones. Oh, and Perplexity. So those are the main ones I use. What about you? What are the ones that you like to use?
Well, as I said, I was gonna call you Gen Z, but you're not. So there is a little bit of a difference. I still heavily use ChatGPT. Honestly, I do use their sub LLMs. Some that are focused on research, some are focused on knowledge sharing and all of that. But I am more and more looking into the other LLMs to add it to my stack. But just start simple. Any model that you use, my understanding that every single one of those models has advantages and disadvantages. If you're heavy on like imaging and that kind of thing, then maybe ChatGPT may not be the best one. But find one that suits you. Just start somewhere, as Omar said, and try to work with it not as a 50-year-old using it as just a supercomputer to give you insight, but use it as a personal coach or as a personal aid. I now when I'm about to read a book, I go to ChatGPT. I said, "Oh, give me a summary of the book. Give me all the major critiques of the book. What do you think? Is this critique valid or not?" So when I go to read the book, I have already, I have so much perspective about the book itself. So maybe that would apply to medicine in some form.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good piece of advice. And Dr. Alkhouli, thank you so much for joining the show. Everyone, be sure to give Dr. Alkhouli a follow. He's Adnan Alkhouli on X. He's, of course, active on LinkedIn. And if you enjoyed this, forward this on to a cardiologist or an innovator. As always, this show grows and great things happen because of you, the listeners. So as always, I'm your host, Omar Khatib, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.